Welcome to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast with Alison, a European town dweller in central Italy, and Andrea, living on a newly created family farm in Northwest Washington State, USA. Pull up a chair at the table and join us as we talk about eating, cooking, and living with ancient ancestral food wisdom in a modern world kitchen.
Welcome back to the Ancestral Kitchen Podcast. Hello, Andrea.
Hello, Alison. I'm so happy to be here with you.
And me too. And this is a particularly interesting episode for me because we are going to be talking about sourdough, which anyone who follows me on Instagram knows that quite a lot of my posts are sourdough. So I'm excited to dive into this topic with you this morning.
This is just your thing. It totally is.
Exactly. It's been my thing for a couple of years now, and I've still got much to learn, so we'll see what comes up today. We started a little bit earlier today for me, but I have had my breakfast. So in our usual starting mode and in a sourdough kind of style, I shall share that I had a sourdough pancake for breakfast.
Oh, yum.
Which was yummy. I used Spelt, and I put a little bit of chestnut flour in. Chestnuts are everywhere in Tuscany, local and fresh and absolutely delicious. And the flour is sweet, but works really well when you mix it with something kind of nutty like Spelt. So I cooked one of those up in some lard that we rendered, and my favourite pancake topping, it's kind of, I'm easily pleased with pancakes. Just having a pancake in itself is enough. But I like to put miso and ground linseed and olive oil on my pancake. So that's what I had this morning. And it was crunchy and delicious and just lovely, lovely.
I love that.
So I'm suitably sated.
Now, you definitely tend towards the savory toppings, and you've said that before, that you don't prefer to have as much sweet. And is that because you said that you basically overdosed on sweets for so long?
Yeah, I've got an interesting kind of situation with sweet in my life, in that because I was, when I was younger, I was overweight. I did that really by going mad on sweet things. I used to eat chocolate in kilogram bars and cakes and biscuits and just sugar in its neat form as well. And that led me to a place, as I've described in one of the earlier podcasts, where when I was 20, I was twice the weight that I am now.
Right.
And I lost the weight a long time ago and maintained it. I lost 140 pounds. But my biome at that early stage of my life, I think, was affected to a point where it's completely different to what it would have been if I had not had that relationship with sugar. Mm-hmm. And what I found out over the last probably 5 or 6 or 7 years is that when I consume sugar, really in any form, including fruit, when I have my cycle, I get vertigo.
Whoa.
And through trial and error and going months without having any sugar at all, the vertigo just stopped. And anyone who's had vertigo knows it's absolutely debilitating. It's just horrible. And so I'd rather not have the vertigo than have the sugar. I'm hoping that as I slowly build up my probiotics and over many years affect my biome through what I'm doing with slowly increasing sauerkraut, slowly increasing other probiotics, that as I move on in my life, that situation will change and I will be able to introduce some fruit, because I do miss fruit a bit. But at the moment, and it's interesting because taste buds are so easily influenced. Once you stop something, your taste buds do adjust and you start, I find I've started to taste sweet in many, many other things that I never tasted sweet in before this happened. So I do get sweet pleasure from some other foods that perhaps other people wouldn't consider sweet, like for instance the chestnut flour. But really with chestnut flour, I'll have a spoonful of that so rarely. So it was a real treat for me this morning. But I feel like I'm doing something positive for my health, and I understand it's because of my particular kind of set of things that happened to me as a kid. And I find it amazing that that was 25 years ago, and yet still my biome is been shaped and is living every day the effects of what happened to me back then. It's amazing.
That does not fit with our modern obsession with fast. This is in 7 days, or if I take this pill, will I be fixed tomorrow? That's a concept outside of our microwave society kind of perception of things.
You're right, and it takes it's taken me some getting used to. The fact that about, I think 3 years ago, I said, right, okay, I need to slowly increase my sauerkraut. I'm not doing very well when I have loads of it. I couldn't sleep. Mm-hmm. So I started from literally half a gram, and then slowly, I've built up to 26 grams of sauerkraut. But to give me the kind of mindset to think that was something that I was going to do, and it might take years and years and years. Right. It's taken a shift in the kind of cultural ideas that I have, like you said, around things should happen quickly, things can happen quickly.
Right.
Because I think in the biome, although you can affect your biome definitely by having probiotics very quickly, to make real lasting change takes a long time.
It does. It's kind of sad, though, how fast we can destroy it. That doesn't seem to take any time at all.
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, dear. So, tell us about your supper this evening. What have you eaten?
Okay, so tonight was actually always dinner is wonderful, I have to say. But tonight was the perfect night to make me look really good on the podcast, because we're on day 2 of a hog slaughter, and so processing the hog. And one thing that we have learned with butchering is it's fun to just take out whatever cut you want, some exorbitant cut, it doesn't matter, and be like, this is our dinner. Anything you want. So Gary, my husband, cut out some steaks from the pig, and he cut out one piece of muscle that's it's 2 muscles actually, I think, but it's called the Denver cut and the copa, and you can separate them, but he kept them together. Then he rolled it up, he tied it with string, and he marinated it for a couple hours this afternoon. But it was kind of a fun, I think he used garlic, and I don't remember what he used, just 2 or 3 things. But anyways, I thought to myself, this is a good example of how a real food dinner can be really, really fast, because he did marinate that Denver and copa piece, but he also made the sirloin steak cuts from the shoulder, and there's plenty of both. We didn't really need both, but we made them both anyways. And he said we were working on the sausage, plowing away through everything, and then he goes, okay, well, we should probably stop and eat dinner. So he stopped. He took the food out to the grill. I went in the kitchen and made biscuits, and in 20 minutes we were sitting down at the table with these grilled steaks. Pretty decadent for us to just have a huge piece of meat. We usually don't just have like a piece of meat. We usually have meat in things. So this felt really fun. And then I made speedy biscuits, the evil non-soaked biscuits, using just raw cream and bread flour. And then we had fermented mustard and sauerkraut. We had applesauce and a honey apple jelly and butter. And it just, I don't know. I was sitting there, and we always say a blessing before food, and I could just feel my mouth just watering. I was so hungry. I think mine's watching now. Yeah, it all looks so good. There's the salt and the fat right on the plate in front of you, and I definitely would say that butchering and home butchering and traditional or ancestral nose to tail preparation is so different from the supermarket cuts. I don't even think I would know how to cook meat from the grocery store, because it's so easy to cook meat from these phenomenal animals. You do nothing to it and everybody goes, this is literally the best, pork, beef, whatever I've ever had. What did you do? And you say, well, I honestly didn't do anything, but the farmer for the past 2 years has been feeding this animal the best of the best, the top of the line, and it shows up in the meat, and everybody appreciates it on the plate, but then they're surprised, and then when you say that the meat matters, I'm surprised how many people say, well, I mean, they don't believe me, but it really does. It really does. So,
and so simple like that, just to marinate it. As I listen to you talking, I can imagine kind of the two of you working together, and the actual home, as a unit. Yes. We have a similar relationship, me and Rob here, in that we kind of complement each other, and after years of working together, we've learned, how to read each other's signals, and one does one thing, one does another thing, and it just sounded really like you and Gary were working together in kind of a harmony there to bring together a dinner for you all really, really easily.
I really appreciate that you mentioned that, and actually that'll transition us into our discussion on sourdough nicely, but because that is my favorite thing, and I actually posted on my Instagram stories today. I was kind of joking, but I said, it was a picture or a video or whatever of me and Gary tying up bags of or paper packs of sausage meat, and I said hashtag farm dates, hashtag normalize farm dates. Because I don't know, for me it feels just very romantic working with the person that I love and doing this project together to take care of our family and feed our children and feed our parents and just plan for the future, and we talk about the future. So but that definitely will pop up in our conversation about sourdough today, especially when we go into the history a little bit. So
I totally agree with you. I feel that around bread, certainly, and all the other things I do in the kitchen with my husband Rob. But we are often, our family is brought together by the things we do, grinding the grain, or we're mixing bread, or we're making, this week we've been making beer as well and using the mash to make bread, and it's something that we all do together, and it every time we do it, it's like it creates a new kind of bond between us, another sort of a tie, and it brings us together and makes us something about the food that you put on the table. If you've all put something into it, you feel bonded by it for sure.
Yes, absolutely. So take us there.
So let's talk about bread. Yeah, let's talk about bread. So I've got quite a lot of areas of sourdough to talk about. The first thing I wanted to do was just to try and define what sourdough is, and I looked up various definitions, and I didn't really like them. So I tried to think about what sourdough means to me. And so for me, sourdough is a bread product that is completely risen by wild yeasts and bacteria. And those wild yeasts and bacteria work over a long time frame. And they produce lactic acid, acetic acid, and gases that rise your bread. And the bread is healthier, it's more natural, it keeps better, and it has much more flavour than alternative breads.
Oh, yeah.
How do you feel about that definition? Do you want to add anything to it?
Well, I mean, there's all the science behind it, but I just think sourdough tastes better. It just does.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, first of all, I wanted to kind of say, well, how was bread made in our history? Because really, sourdough is, although it's very fashionable, it's not a new phenomenon. No. Because generally all bread used to be made like this until really very, very recently.
Right.
For absolute millennium, there was no commercial yeast available. There was no commercially baked breads like there are today. And so those yeasts to make bread would have been made literally from what was around you, captured wild yeasts. There are references in texts from thousands of years ago. And then as societies moved on, I know in the 1700s in England, people who made bread used to go and get yeast from beer barm, using yeasts that were kind of available and around them. And we I think it's easy to look at breads in the supermarket that one might see these days and think that's what bread is. But bread really, for 95% of our history, maybe even more, has been sourdough.
Yep.
Hasn't it?
Yep.
You've been doing some reading on the history, haven't you? Tell us a bit about what you've uncovered.
Yeah. So my sister turned me on to this podcast called The History of Food. So
that's such a good podcast.
If you can't listen to enough about food, there's more for you. So he referenced in episode 27, which if you want to hear about the history of bread in Breve, go to that episode number 27. It's an hour and 24 minutes. So that might not sound very brief, but I mean, he's trying to cover all of human history. So, but he refers multiple times to this blog, which I had to go and find. And it's called A Collection of Unmitigated Pedantry. And it's acoup.blog online, or just look up. I just Googled it, A Collection of Unmitigated Pedantry. And he has a 5-part series about bread. How did they make it? And it is so fascinating because we either don't eat bread because of, their dietary choices or dietary restrictions, or we just don't like it, or we do eat it. We just go to the store and we stand in front of shelves with monetary exchange rates listed there, and we choose a plastic bag with the picture on it that most appeals to us, or an advertisement on the side that most appeals to us, and we go home and that's our bread. But bread has pretty much been the foundation of society for quite a long time. It's been something that people's entire existence rises and falls on. So if you have ever read the Bible, then there's just so many literary references to bread in there, like give us this day our daily bread, when the devil tells Jesus to turn stones into bread, or all the way back to ancient Egypt, where the Hebrews are making their unleavened bread for Passover and things like that. So it's just something that is woven throughout all of our history. And as for why, well, what you just said about sourdough is kind of why. It's a really simple, nutritious food that you can make. And I think we have a idea that it's complicated, either because we've been told so many skills are too hard for us and it's better to leave it to people who are professionals at it. And this goes for everything from teaching your kid how to read to making bone broth, But I think with sourdough, what I would say is it's been done. It's a simple task that humans have been doing for thousands of years. And it's not hard. It's just different.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on two words you used to describe bread. You said simple and nutritious. And I wanted to contrast that with the bread that is sold on most of the shelves in the UK, my home country. So in the UK, in the early 1960s, there was a method called the Chorley Wood method brought in for bread. And now 80% of the bread on UK shelves is made using this method.
Wow.
And it was so popular because it made it much, much, much cheaper to make bread. It made the bread softer and it doubled the shelf life of it. And what happens in this process is just kind of abominable to me.
Oh no.
The standard ingredients of bread are there, and then extra hard fats are added, extra yeast is added, extra chemicals are added, and then the bread is whipped in massive machines. The dough is whipped to make the loaves, in an absolute fraction of the time that it would take a normal person to make a yeasted loaf, let alone a sourdough loaf. And then it's sliced, packaged in plastic and sent to the supermarket. And I think, comparing that to the simple and nutritious words that you used to describe bread, it's like the other end of the spectrum.
It's now it's a chemical production.
Yeah. It's a production line, and as with so many of the other things we've talked about and we will talk about, it started with the Industrial Revolution requiring this quick, large, consistent, scalable product. And because of the discoveries of Louis Pasteur and the fact that yeasts were alive and his ability to kind of heat properties to pasteurize them and then inoculate things, that kind of led to there being a baker's yeast, which in my research by the 1900s was a household item in England. And then we just seem to have gone completely downhill from there to this place where on the shelves in the UK are these loaves made in a process that if you showed a baker from 300 or 400 years ago, they just wouldn't recognise, with all these additives in that you don't know what they're called when you look at the label. And people just think that's bread.
Well, I think one of the ways that we get away with this in manufacture is because we're generation by generation removed farther and farther from the memory of bread.
Yeah.
So when people want to make bread at home, bizarrely enough, they are now trying to recreate the grocery store bread. And they're shocked when Spelt sourdough doesn't puff up and fluff up and turn into a sponge the way, nutritionally stripped, denuded wheat-like products do when they're combined with chemicals. And that, I think, that's theft, to steal the memory one generation at a time. And then, we're left with all we know is the spongy sliced bread in the store.
I think what you're saying is true. There's a kind of a psychological term for it. I think maybe we've talked about it before, where it's a new norm. For each generation has a new norm,
right,
because it's what they're used to and what they've grown up with. And then because they don't have that previous memory,
and you can go a little bit farther each time.
It seems like it's normal to them.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
With less disruption.
Yeah.
People would really fight if you
Exactly.
tried to do this, even 100 years ago. But now it's not so hard.
Yeah, so it's just slipping away. Let's talk about the health benefits, because, we've kind of said how it was normal,
Right.
and how it was part of the daily household. But there are incredible health benefits to slow fermented sourdough bread. And on both sides of the coin, that's part of the reason why so many people have problems with store-bought bread, because the grain is not processed in the same way. So regarding the health benefits that I know of, first of all, the grain itself is pre-digested in the sourdough process. So that means there's less work for our bodies to do to get the nutrients from that grain. And digestion is one of the most high energy tasks of the body. So anything we can do to make that easier allows other energy to be freed up to carry on healing us and do better things in our body. I know that sourdough is lower on the GI index than normal bread because the sugars are metabolized in the process. So anyone who has any blood sugar issues would find sourdough better for them than standard bread. And regards gut health, even though you're cooking, the probiotics that are in the starter, there are postbiotics and paraprobiotics in that cooked material which are going in and changing the layout, the territory in your gut biome for the better. During the fermentation process, the anti-nutrients in the grain, the phytates and the lectins, are broken down, and there are more bioavailable nutrients in the bread because of the fermentation process. And in addition, the process alters the proteins in the bread. So in the example of a wheat or a spelt, it alters the gluten. And I know that kind of firsthand here, because when I met my husband 10 years ago, he couldn't eat wheat at all. He had unbelievable problems with it. And over the last 10 years, he's moved to a space where, although I cook spelt most of the time in our house, he can eat my spelt absolutely fine, but he can also occasionally eat sourdough wheat without issues, and that's incredible considering the state he was in when I met him. And I think there are a lot of things involved in that, but the fact that sourdough that we make here now alters the gluten in the grain is a large kind of chunk in why that's happened to him. So that's kind of a huge list of the health benefits that if you eat sourdough regularly, you're going to get, which are just not there in store-bought bread that's been fermented in a few
completely
hours
devoid
and whipped up.
It's an anti-nutrient. You don't even have the portions of the wheat that make the wheat safe for you to ingest in those store-bought breads. So you're now putting yourself at risk just by eating them, which is mind-boggling.
There was a big kind of exposure campaign, I would say, about a couple of years ago in Europe about shop-bought sourdough, because a lot of the baking companies were jumping on the sourdough trend and producing loaves that had pretty kind of packaging and looked artisanal and calling them sourdough. And then if you look at the labels, you see they've actually got baker's yeast in, and they had perhaps a vinegar put in to give that acetic acid flavour. And so I wanted to mention here that, if you don't have at this moment the skills, or if in a moment when you're having a busy week you think I'd buy a sourdough, do look at the labels of the sourdoughs that you see. If you buy it from a baker, it's more likely that it's going to be properly processed. But from a supermarket, I wouldn't trust seeing the label sourdough on a supermarket shelf. So do look at the labels and make sure if you're buying sourdough that it actually is a soured dough.
Right.
I don't know if that's the same in the US, whether that's kind of happened there.
We have so many labeling scandals. It's worthless to even try to keep up with it. You literally cannot trust anything. And one thing you'll notice on breads here is it will say this huge blaring advertisement on the side, made with whole wheat. And people think, oh, all right, that's the real deal. But if you look on the back, number one ingredient, bleached flour, and then there is some whole wheat in it. See, it was made with whole wheat. Whole wheat was in it.
2%.
Yeah, 2%. Just enough to get on the label. So it's disappointing, and I think that's part of why my frustration tends to compel me to make things at home. And I do acknowledge, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge the moms who are listening who are just exhausted and overwhelmed and think to themselves, okay, so great, I can't make this bread for my family, so I'm a bad mom. No, you're not. You're not a bad mom. And I think probably all of us have, as Alison was just saying, that week where you're just, I don't know, just worn out, So, yeah, I just don't want somebody to think that I would criticize or judge them for not doing it, but definitely read those labels before you buy something, because it's
a nice thing to support a local baker sometimes if they're doing a good thing and trying to compete against a supermarket.
Absolutely.
It's a nice thing to go out and taste someone else's bread as well. Mm-hmm. Is there anything you want to add to the health benefits before we move on to something more practical?
No, I just wanted to say that I loved when you said that it had the para and postbiotics, because my favorite lunch is a pint jar of garlic, kimchi or kraut, and a chunk of sourdough and a bunch of butter, and just like soak up all the liquid out of that jar onto the bread. And now I'm thinking, okay, that's why I like it, because it's the full meal deal for my gut.
That is wonderful. Bread is just a blessing because it does that soaking up.
It does.
It's a thing here in Italy. There's a term which I think is called fare la scarpetta.
Oh, wow.
And it means basically using the end of bread to push around your plate when you finished your dinner and soak up all the bits, because that's an important thing for bread to be able to do, of course.
We who wash the dishes, thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. Good.
Let's talk about practical things. Now, I started my sourdough journey about a year before we left England, so that was perhaps 3 years ago. And I was just in my house in Penzance, and I got some books from the library. But I wanted to share the main resource that I used at that time, because I think as a beginning sourdough baker, it's tough to know where to go, to know who to follow. Everyone's got different routines, everyone's got different ideas, everyone builds their starter differently. And what happened with me was I was there in the southwest of England and I wanted to use local flour. So I was like, no, I'm not having any Canadian flour. I'm not having any of this imported flour. I know that UK flour is low protein, but I'm going to use it anyway. And I wanted to be completely 100% whole grain. So I set myself a ridiculous task. I mean, I'd never baked sourdough ever, and I suddenly wanted to use UK flour completely, 100% whole grain. And what happened was I went online, and rather than finding an individual person's site, I found a site called thefreshloaf.com. And it's a collection of forums, bread forums, which are extremely active. And you can be a novice or you can be an expert. There's some professional bakers on there. And there are people who've been on there literally like 15 years giving advice to others. Wow. And so I read and I read and I read on that forum, because all of the posts from years and years and years are there. And I started to post my bakes, pictures, asking questions. And I found a mentor, a guy who lives in London, who kind of took me on, and we started emailing. And he had much more experience than me. And he helped me through working with, at that time, there was a particular English spelt that was very low in protein that I just couldn't get to rise. And we had a relationship for maybe 6 or 7 months, emailing, sharing recipes, sharing what we'd done. And he literally mentored me from that site. And I still use the site today when I have problems. I had a problem with my grain grinder a couple of months ago, and I posted a message about that. And it's so helpful, so many different opinions, and it's a free resource. You know, you don't need to go and buy the book or go out to the library and try and get books. It's just there at your fingertips. And so I wanted to give a kind of a really big shout out, because that really has been the most influential resource for me in my sourdough baking journey. How about you, Andrea? What resources do you use or have you used?
I was going to say, we'll make sure and link that in the show notes.
Definitely.
I love, well, of course, The Art of Fermentation, as usual. I probably will be the record for most mentioned book on this podcast. But that book definitely has a great layout. He's so conversational in that book, I think, is what I like about it, is I don't feel like I'm reading this scientific, tome. I just feel like I feel like as if I had emailed him and say, so what do you do for sauerkraut? And then this is what he sent back to me. You know what I mean? I love the Peter Reinhardt's Artisan Breads Every Day, which I mentioned before. It's not completely sourdough, but I pretty much just use the sourdough section to death. And Nourishing Tradition has a little bit on sourdough breads as well, and some information about, actually, if you want to know some more of the scientific and nutritional benefits of, fermenting grains, that's a great book. There's lots of information in there about that. But I would also say that I've looked a lot online, just here and there. Like I'll have a question and I'll look it up online. And like you were just saying a minute ago, that there's so many different ways to do it. Everybody has their own way. I would say, rather than looking at that and feeling overwhelmed that you just don't know how you're going to get it right, I would say look at that and say, okay, there's about 18 million ways to do this. It can't be that hard. There's so many right ways to do it. And then, as Alison, you also just said, when, you know, you get these really specific questions. Oh, I had this lower protein flour that I was having trouble. Okay, then now you can go into those detailed, you know, comment sections or whatever and read. But just to get started is, I think it's from an philosophical standpoint, we just need to know you basically need to be able to stir a spoon in a bowl. I mean, that's about the skill level that's needed. And the fact that
3 years on, that's all I still do. I don't have a mixer. I have my hands and I have a spoon.
Right. And I do have a mixer. Gary got me one when we first got married, and I love my mixer, but I don't even always use it for the bread. It's just so pleasurable to mix bread by hand, so satisfying. And sometimes I think, I just need to go make some bread just for therapy, because it's so relaxing. It's very calming. Yeah. So,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So look online. Don't worry about the fact that there's a bajillion ways and everybody's going to tell you on their blog that theirs is the one and only way. There's a lot of right ways to do it, because everybody in every culture throughout all of humanity has been making versions of this, and not everybody has had access to the same water or the same grains or the same ambient temperatures or the same cooking methods, but everybody figured out a way to make it happen. So
tell us what type of bread you make there, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to hear one of your favorite recipes or your go-to recipes that you use.
Okay, so I love einkorn flour. It's one flour that just is easy for me to digest for whatever reason, and sometimes I'll even mix it with bread flour made from wheat, which I find when that's fermented, I don't really have any trouble with it at all. And we get our flour from Azure Standard, which is here in our region, and they have farms out here in the, you know, Montana, Idaho, Washington area, and they use what they call a unifying grinder, so the bread is ground. It's not heated while it's ground, so that way it retains more of its nutritional content. And what is my most commonly used sourdough recipe? I would have to say the one out of Peter Reinhardt's book. Just his whole grain sourdough recipe is probably the one I use the most. Although I do have a tendency to, even for things like bread, say, that I make all the time, I have a tendency to always be trying new recipes. So I do like to just look online and see things, or flip through books and find things and try them out just to see how I like them. But that's probably the one I come back to the most.
Nice. And do all of your family eat it?
Oh yeah, they're just happy if I make bread.
Yeah.
And
I heard that I remember you saying you had loads of rye flour as well, so you make rye bread.
Yeah, I do. I have a lot of rye flour. I love the flavor of sour rye. So, I like that too. And I like to sometimes I do it in pans, sometimes I do it in just standing bowls. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
bowls, I think. Yeah.
Bowls.
Oh, you get me started on different pans.
Sorry.
So I do kind of, it's similar to you that I've tried lots of different recipes, and the other thing that's very similar between our process is the grain that we buy. So all the grain that I work with here is Italian grain.
Okay.
I use Spelt probably for 60 to 70% of my loaves. I also make rye bread regularly, which my husband prefers to Spelt. And then I make lectin-free breads, which I use at the moment, sorghum and millet. I feel very lucky to live here in Italy, which is
warm.
Really a bread bowl country.
Yeah.
So we can get loads of different grains, and they're all local, and they're all beautifully kind of ground by individual mills, and they taste wonderful, and they're good for making bread. So I wanted to share. I've got lots of recipes for bread on my site, Ancestral Kitchen. Some of them are rye, some of them are spelt, and some of them are kind of other things you can make with bread. But my kind of go-to spelt recipe has been 100% whole grain spelt loaf with something called a scald in it. And a scald is where you take a small portion of the flour you're going to use in the bread, and before you mix it into the dough, you heat it up on the stove with water into a kind of a porridge, a thick porridge. And then you add that into the dough before you put in your starter and before you mix it. And the reason I work with that, with spelt, is because I found that spelt has a tendency to go stale quite quickly. And also the crumb can be a bit hard. And the scald helps with both of those things. It softens the crumb, which makes it really a beautiful kind of sandwichy loaf. But also it helps it maintain its freshness for a few more days.
So it's more hydrated.
So that,
really?
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah. So there's a recipe on my site, which I'm looking at now, which details exactly how to make the whole grain spelt sourdough loaf with a scald, with kind of pictures and all the measurements. So that can be followed. Like I said, there's also recipes on my site for at least 2 ryes. I have a prized tin here, which is made by a company called Emile Henry.
Oh, I loved it. I have some of their
probably
pie
Emile
pans and
Henry.
I love them.
I think. Oh, I just before we left England, I ummed and ahed about this pan, this loaf tin, for ages, because we were making in tins that had coverings on, anti-stick coverings, and we know that just those are just not good things to bake in. But I would line them with greaseproof paper so that stuff wouldn't go into my loaves. And then I was looking for tins, trying to find, do I get a glass loaf tin? Can I get a ceramic loaf tin? What can I get? And we bought this Emile Henry loaf tin. It's got a lid with 2 tiny little holes in it, and it makes the most amazing loaves. The crust is wonderful, because rather than having to steam the oven or cover your loaf, in a Dutch oven with a lid,
right,
just put the lid on, and it creates a kind of an ambient steam, a steam room inside your loaf tin, and that gives the bread the capability to rise up before the crust hardens in the oven. So you get a really good rise, but then you get a really beautiful crust too. And I've used that literally every time I make bread. Sometimes I make more than 1 loaf at a time, and I only have 1 Emile Henry, unfortunately. So I do use other tins as well, but I think that really helps with the quality of the bread that we produce here, and it's just such a joy to use, because it feels like a beautiful part of my process. It's much valued in our household.
Oh, absolutely. I love the way you described that tin. It's ceramic though, so you call it a tin just as a meaning a pan.
Pan, loaf tin. Yeah, but it's not a tin. You're right. It's ceramic. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm terrified I'm going to drop it, but we haven't dropped it so far in like 2.5 years. So
it wants to stick around crossed. A little bit longer.
Yeah.
Well, I think the way Peter Reinhardt has you do the bread is kind of recreating a situation like that, where I will slide it in on, so I usually use a baking stone, and then you can put your bread on, and you can rise it for the final rise on parchment paper if it's just freestanding loaf, and then you'll slide it in onto that hot stone. Mm-hmm. And then he has you put a metal pan in the bottom, and then pour boiling water into it, and then close the oven door just to give that steamy effect. But that pan that you're describing sounds a little bit easier than that.
It is. I've done other methods. I've done the stone with an upside down big metal kind of bowl on it, and I've done steaming the oven. But the ceramic pan with the lid it's just easier.
I you know what? Sometimes I just like it easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is funny because we're on here.
Moving on. Yeah.
We're on here talking about these complex situations. And I'm like, we just want it to be easy.
Well, it's nice to be able to take something that perhaps takes more energy and more time,
yes,
and find ways to make it streamlined, but also to make it beautiful, because I love my Emile Henry tin. I really do.
I call it prioritizing, and I always tell Gary I have to think about what is, maybe spending the money on the tin it's a little bit more money to spend, right? But once you have it, now you've eliminated just this chunks of tasks that, with pouring the water and things. So I always think to myself, what can I outsource? Now I've outsourced all that effort of putting the pan in and the water. I just outsourced that to Emile Henry and he's doing it for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. Thank you. I wanted to kind of picking up on the Emile Henry and the value of, I feel really warm and cozy when I think about that loaf tin, and talking about what we were earlier, the kind of working together as a team and a household. I wanted to touch on how making bread in the home changes the way that you think about bread and how you value bread. And this is something that is very close to my heart. I'm extremely passionate about, particularly because it plays into not only how you feel psychologically and as a family unit, but it plays into the waste in our world and the environment and local grain economies. Because I know there's just a statistic that recounts that 44% of bread made in the UK is thrown away.
What?
And we're not exactly. When I read that, I was staggered.
So
that's a million.
Hold on. So
a million loaves every day are thrown away in the UK.
Okay, so we're throwing our intellectual and industrial effort behind finding ways to make more, faster, quicker, cheaper, GMO food, GMO grains, and then we're going to try and do this speedy process you're talking about to crank out 2 million loaves a day, just so we can throw half of it away. I mean, slow it down halfway and stop throwing it away.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
I think when I saw that statistic, I thought, where is this happening? So I did some more research, and a lot of it is thrown away in the supermarket food chain. So mistakes they make, or things that don't get to shelf, or things that are too old. A lot of it gets thrown away because supermarkets in this country, or in the UK, do buy one get one free promotions on bread. And so people buy 2 loaves and they don't need 2 loaves, and so they throw some of it away. I know in my past, people didn't like the end bits of bread. My parents didn't like the crusts. And so a lot of people don't like crust, so they just throw away the crust, because why would you when the bread costs only a few pennies? Why does it matter if you throw away crust?
The bread is worth. Let me tell you, if you or I saw somebody cut off the end of our sourdough spelt loaf and throw it away,
I'd fight over that.
I'd have a heart attack. You're not there.
I want the crusty bit.
I know, that's my favorite part.
And I think it often goes mouldy as well. I mean, you leave the bread in a plastic wrapper in a pot in your kitchen, and it's going to go mouldy.
Right.
And when I was doing my research, there've been a lot of initiatives to try to change people's opinion on sliced bread. So, how to use sliced bread when it's old, how to make it less stale, how to make recipes that involve stale bread in. But that seems to be coming from the perspective of, well, you've bought a supermarket loaf and you don't know what to do with it, so this is the way we can stop waste happening. And I really think there's a much better way at coming at this problem, which is just get people to bake wherever they can.
Yep.
Because if you bake your own loaf, you're value, the value that you put on that loaf completely changes.
Absolutely.
Because you know where the flour came from, how long it took you to source it, you know how long it took you to build your sourdough starter up and how much energy went into it. You know you put your own hands in there, you know you baked it, you know you put a thermometer in it to see what temperature it was, and you, is it done, is it not done? And you know the smell that was in your house, you know what it looked like, you know how it sounded when you cut the first kind of slice of it, and you just have a completely different view on bread. And Italy has a legacy, a huge swathe of recipes for stale bread, because, like you were saying earlier on, bread was a staple. Bread has been an Italian staple for many, many, many centuries. And so there are tons of recipes for stale bread. And Tuscan bread particularly doesn't have salt in it, so it goes dry quite quickly. And people then have used that bread so creatively to make a ton of dishes that are part of the centre of Tuscan food now.
Right. Which we've now separated completely from the concept of using up the bread.
Of using
and then
it
we
up
go
as
and
old bread.
buy bread to make the recipe.
and it's a gourmet dish now, whereas it was just a dish that people used.
It was a trash
bread.
food, and now it's a bougie, expensive. That's only for the people who can afford it.
I feel as if, the more people can bake, the more people I can inspire to just bake. That's how to change this bread waste issue, because the supermarkets aren't going to move. The supermarkets care about profit. They don't care if they throw bread away. They don't care if they, do the buy one get one free and people throw the loaf away.
Right.
The way to get people to change it is to get people to care, and the way you care is by doing it yourself. So as you can hear, I'm on my soapbox. I feel really strongly about this.
Hey, stay on the soapbox. It's really, really true. And I think what we also should emphasize here is the more shocking side of sourdough is that this kind of food goes along with a lifestyle that is slower. And it's hard to just leap from, I rush. It's, from one thing to the next. It's hard to just rush from that into, Alison getting rid of her iPhone,
Yeah.
So I think making graduations along the way, picking up one skill at a time. And then, Gary and I upstairs were grinding sausage. We're making little patties, tasting it, and then wrapping it in butcher paper and writing the date on it and carrying it out to the freezer. And why would we do that when we could just outsource it and pay somebody to do it? Well, part of it is because we enjoy the slowness that it forces on us, and we enjoy sitting there, and we enjoy the kids are up there. Well, they're not right now, they're asleep, but the kids were up there with him, like helping him shove the meat into the grinder, or, they watched him break the entire pig down, and they saw the heart, and they want to hold the liver and everything. So as you make these little graduations, and I think starting to make sourdough would be a huge, wonderful first step right along that way. You start to experience the pleasure that comes from that. It's a different pleasure than the kind when we outsource our ability to entertain ourselves and we pay Netflix to do that. And now Netflix has to come up with something new and fresh and entertain us. But I think it's pretty entertaining to cut up a pig with your family, and the learning to savor the joy that produces, just in the same way that we learn to savor, the new flavors of the food. I think that's an important aspect of sourdough.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what you said as small steps is important, because very rarely do you go from kind of life in the fast lane to that. I mean,
right.
I know that in my what I call my past life when I was working for Microsoft, I didn't do what I do in the kitchen now. And I think if someone had told me what I was doing now, I would have been like, really? But each thing along the line has kind of grabbed me and pulled me in more.
Right.
And each step I've taken away from that 9-to-5 life, slowly, to intentionally build something else, has rewarded me in ways that tell me that I'm on the right path. You know, this feels in accordance with my nature far more than what I used to do and how I used to live. But yeah, it's small steps. Yeah. For sure.
And Tara Couture, who I can't remember if I referenced her on the podcast or just when you and I had a conversation. No, it was you and I were talking about the gut biome. And she said, I didn't get here from zero. It was little steps along the way. And that is what we need to hold in our mind. It's little steps along the way. So sourdough is a great place to start because it's so fun, it's so satisfying, and it's very Instagrammable.
Yeah, exactly. Oh dear. If someone had said that 10 years ago, we'd have been like, what?
I don't get it.
What are you talking about? Yeah. Okay, so I'm aware of time. We're getting close to time. I wanted to just add another kind of little topic in before we end, which is that sourdough is so much more than just bread. So the processing of souring grains is used and has been used by various cultures in so many more ways than just producing a loaf. Yeah. So some of the things that I do in my own kitchen, which are a bit different from the standard kind of sourdough loaf, are different processes. So using kefir to sour a batter or a dough, using a yeast water rather than a sourdough starter to sour a batter or dough.
That picture you just posted on Instagram.
Thank you.
I'm so excited.
Making muffins, sourdough muffins or kefir muffins, making biscuits, making pancakes. There's a huge history of making sourdough pancakes.
Oh, sourdough
making
crackers.
Pancakes with discard sourdough crackers. Yes. Making sourdough porridges. I know they're not a dough, they're more a porridge, but they're sourdough porridges. There's sourdough pizza, which there's a lovely recipe for on my site, which we have often, which I love. And I've got a sourdough pancake recipe on my site. Sourdough is so much more. And in our house, for sure, there are pancakes, as I had for my breakfast. There are muffins, there are biscuits, there are porridges, there is pizza. So it's easy to kind of get focused on the loaf, but be aware that there's literally a whole nother world around you of all these things you can do with sour grains.
Yes, because the grains, as you said, they're pre-digested and they're now available to one-stomached humans. Sometimes we think we have more than one stomach, we're that hungry, but we just have the one. Doesn't do very much. It's kind of pathetic in terms of digestion if you compare us with other animals out there that can basically eat, rotting meat and they're fine. Yeah. But that's not us. But Charlotte Mason said in her first volume, she has, because I've been posting this online, but she has a lot to say about sitting down at the table and enjoying your meals. And she says it's not the food we eat that nourishes us, it's the food we digest, which is
amen to that.
So powerful for someone to be saying in the 1800s. Yeah. When now we know that and she was in 1800s England, where you're really suffering, you're getting chalk mixed into your bread. And this is like the boom era of industrialized food and factories everywhere. And, Charles Dickens kind of world, the landscape. And she never says, ancestral foods, but she could tell that we weren't getting everything out of our food that we once did. So that
we know that, and some people who are tuned into their bodies and their intuition can feel that, and luckily some of them express it, and the rest of us learn.
We just try to struggle along. No, I think you are very, very in tune, Alison. You're very in tune.
only because really I've had to because of my weight loss journey, because of the journey that I've been on,
Right.
and also because of moving countries and kind of leaving corporate and all of that stuff. I've had to look inside, and I've had to follow what my body was saying, and that's forced me to learn to listen to my body, which is not an easy thing to do, but brings such rewards.
That's something you'll see. I've noticed a huge trend among homesteaders is, well, I'm living this life because my child has such severe, allergies that he can only drink camel milk. And so now we live on a farm and we have a camel. You know what I mean? And this drive to nourish ourselves and our families is what is sending people out to the land, because they're just finding, well, it's just not feasible in the city. So I guess and I know you can do this on a 1/4 acre, but I just need some space and some land. And so here we end up on, a patch of grass or trees or whatever.
Rob and I talk about this a lot, and the reason both of us have been what looks like so extreme to outsiders in our journey is because both of us got to rock bottom with our health. Wow. And I wouldn't wish it on anyone else, but I also want the world to change. And I think it's easy if you don't have challenges like that to coast along and be distracted by things. And so although I didn't enjoy the struggles that I've been through, I really wouldn't ask for anything different, because they brought me to a place of such, what I feel is such truth and integrity, and they keep inspiring me to move forward.
That's really pivotal, because, what you said, I guess we need to hire a billboard to put it up there, but I think a lot of people have hit rock bottom with their health. The problem is we're not looking at the food or the lifestyle as the solution. We're saying, well, I've hit rock bottom. Therefore, there's got to be more pills I can take. There's got to be something else I can do. And if they don't, then we're just told, oh, you just got to live with that. That's just your future from now on. And I wish, when you said, I noticed I would get really bad vertigo whenever I had the sugar, Okay, how many people with vertigo are connecting it to their diet right now? I'll guarantee you, like 0%. Nobody is. Because their doctor is saying, oh, it has nothing to do with your food. For Pete's sake, when I asked a dentist about the kids, and I said, so I just wanted to see what he would say. And because I know what I've read, but I wanted to see what he would say. And so I said, so can they eat things that would help support the health of their teeth? Bone broth. And he goes, no, that's not really going to do. What we eat doesn't really affect our teeth. Dear. And I was like, okay, I wasn't going to try to, change his mind. And then 2 sentences later, he said, the number one thing I see causing cavities in kids is their yogurt. And of course, I know he means sugar yogurt. So he doesn't mean yogurt. He means sugar. But I wanted to jump up out of my chair and be, you mean the food does affect our teeth? Because it's a matter of,
the difference is whether you choose to take responsibility or whether you're scared of taking responsibility and you pass that on to a doctor or someone else, And our culture has this don't take responsibility thing. And it's easy not to take responsibility. It's easy to have someone else solve your problems for you, but it's not a good way to go.
It would be nice. It'd be nice if that worked. That would be great. But that, unfortunately, isn't the way it is. And I think what just the tragedy to me, and why I was so excited when you proposed doing this podcast, is because the tragedy to me is that we don't acknowledge that our food is playing such a big role in our health. We don't acknowledge that our food is affecting our mood and our, vertigo. We pretty much get that food affects weight, and that's about where it ends. And if we could just awaken everybody to the idea that their food is playing a role. I don't have to tell you to make sourdough or how to make sourdough. Once you have the idea that your food is affecting everything about your life, you will begin to seek out and the things will come to you. But until your eyes are opened to that, you will not see it passing by.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and one of the pivotal moments of my life of that was when I sat in front of a doctor and they told me, you will never have a kid if you don't take these drugs. And I was like, no, that's not true. And then I took my own journey and proved them wrong. And that, once you get a little taste of that, once you see what's possible, then you just can't stop, because you know about these connections and you know how things work, and that you don't have to rely on someone else, that you can take responsibility, and then that will take you on a path that deepens every aspect of you as a human. And we're getting into some serious topics here.
We're just talking about sourdough. I don't know what you're talking about. Just talking about bread and toast.
Oh dear. I think we need to close. I had a quote as well. You just quoted Charlotte Mason. The botanical starter book that I've been reading, that I kind of mentioned a little bit earlier on, is written by a guy called Paul Barker. And he has a quote at the beginning of it, which is that the secret ingredient of bread is passion. Yes. And I wanted to mention that. It seems like a nice way to round off our passionate kind of discussion then, and our discussion on sourdough. Because really, the bread that is in supermarkets, just, I couldn't, devoid of passion is not enough for me to explain how that bread is.
Yes.
But the bread that we make here, and the bread that you can make in your own homes, when you get a loaf out and it smells wonderful and it tastes wonderful, the passion in that is the thing that brings that amazing food to life.
Yes.
And to bring that into your home and into your kitchen and to your table is just a joy, and it transforms so many things. So I wanted to round off sourdough with that, and thank you for sharing about how you make sourdough and your research you've done, and I hope that we've inspired a few people in the last hour or so.
That's the most we can do.
Yeah. Great.
Well, thank
Thanks,
you, Alison.
Andrea.
This was exciting. Can't wait to talk with you again.
Me too. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. We'd love to continue the conversation. Come find us on Instagram. Andrea's at Farm and Hearth and Alison's at ancestral_kitchen. Until next time, we both wish you much fun, exploration, and satisfaction in and out of the kitchen.